Good evening. Welcome to LexArt Inspires. This is our monthly conversation with artists about the sparks of inspiration that set us free. My name is Wayne Davis. I'm a board member at LexArt, and I'll be your host tonight. And with me live in person and shockingly in the same room, so this is new for us at LexArt Inspires to have people in the same room, is our guest, Madeleine Lord. Let me extend a very special welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time tonight. I know there are a lot of friends and family of Madeleine who've joined us, so thank you for joining us. Before we start the conversation with Madeleine, I'd like to just take a moment to share with you, give you a moment of introduction to LexArt. And can everyone see the screen with our title shot there? Okay. We're a community arts nonprofit whose mission is to spark joy, enrich lives, and build community through the practice, teaching, and sharing of art and craft. Actually, so a couple of things we have going on right now in our Nye Gallery. We're hosting the 11th State of Clay exhibit. For many years, this has been the place to see the latest and very best work of ceramic artists from across the state of Massachusetts. This year's show is no exception. There are a marvelous array of pieces ranging from modern interpretations of classical forms, such as you see on the screen here, to some very provocative reflections on the social, political, and cultural moment that we find ourselves in. Please do stop in to visit in person and also join us for our virtual artist reception and juror talk this Sunday at 5:30. You can visit lexart.org for more details. We're regularly holding, we've got classes. We're regularly adding new online and in-person classes and workshops. We've got virtual exhibits and so forth. With our classes, we've got LexArt is really expanding the breadth of our offerings this year. Just this weekend, for example, we've got a shibori dyeing class. There are 1 or 2 spots still left, if anyone is interested in that, to Turkish paper marbling coming up. Actually, one of our viewers tonight, Christina Hajosi, is teaching that class. And we've got ceramic sculpture, movie making for teens, and a bunch of other really fun classes. So I hope you'll take a look at that. And also a quick reminder, it is gift giving season. We've got some great finds from our LexArt member artisans for sale at the website and in the Nye Gallery. And also, if you've got weddings or anything really special coming up, there are a few pieces left from the State of Clay show, but I was in there this afternoon. There are a lot of red dots already. So if you want something really special, you better get in there fast. And with that, let's now turn to our main event. So our guest tonight has been making art for well over 50 years, but she tells me that it's only in the last 5 years or so that she's listed artist on her tax returns. She's worked in a variety of media over those years, drawing, painting, photography, and with a focus in the past 20 years or so in metal sculpture. Her work is displayed in numerous permanent public art installations in New England and nationally. And across those many years, diverse media, and many different subjects, our guest has consistently mined the magic in her own soul to produce artworks of stunning creativity, great beauty, and sly wit. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Madeleine Lord.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Molly, who invited me here. And I had no idea what she was really inviting me to do. And so I said, yes, sure, no problem. I thought I'd have 5 minutes to talk while a panel of other people spoke eloquently, but here we are. Molly, I can't thank you enough for the invitation. It has changed a lot of my whole view of what actually happened. And I also, when we get to my first slide, would like to highlight, and I'm not going to read it, all of the arts organizations that were part of my life and very structurally important to my life as an artist on the edges of my full-time job, all the communities, all the administrators, all of the juried exhibitions that were challenges, all of my friends who would participate, and we would call and say, did you get in? These things are critical. And so LexArt is another example of a critical milestone pathway for any artist who needs a community and a place to display and a personal challenge. And I'd like to dedicate this tonight, my talk with you, to a dear man, James Peary Williams Thompson, who shoehorned me into the Asheville, North Carolina Museum for a retrospective that I shared with another woman, because he wanted to honor people who make art and work full time. And it was a privilege to be in that show, to have several things left in that museum, and to even have a subsidiary show in the Black Mountain Gallery, which is a treasure on this earth, the whole Black Mountain history. That's the screen I was talking to. You are my lifelines. You gave me deadlines, but really on the flip side of that concept is lifeline. And so this is my latest piece. It's called Hug Finally, and I send it out to all of you. Thank you for coming. And so.
Okay, there we go.
There's something to consider while we're watching tonight. As Wayne explained, in the third half of this show, as Click and Clack used to call it, you get a chance to chime in. But while you travel with me through display of, my past 30, 40 years of effort, I remember people saying along the way, your art is always changing. And maybe you can respond at the end of this if you found a way that it really wasn't. And also, it's a story about working my art on the edges of a very complex life with a lot of time responsibilities and a lot of location responsibilities. So I managed to do this on the edges. And if that's a parallel challenge for you, then take heart, it's possible. And third, as we go through this, I'm going to point out the people along the way who planted seeds that grew later or grew in the same moment. But I figured that out by looking back. And so I recommend that if you would find pleasure in that, to do the same for yourself, to poke through where you've been and look for the influences that are making you who you are now. How did this all happen? Okay. Well, in my life, art was really always there. We live near Pittsburgh, a city full of museums, collected lovely collections by very rich men. The schools I attended had art classes and art time and teachers. This monoprint is a photo of me about the time I was in St. James, third grade, when I was busted for drawing portraits of my classmates. The mother of Terrence Brennan, who went home with a beautiful silhouette pencil drawing of himself, looked just like him. That mother called the nuns, and they called my mom. And art was in my blood, as well as in the fridge, as I'll explain. My mother's French family included an 18th century artist, Jean de Boissieu. He was the treasurer et engraveur de France under Louis XV, the French Rembrandt, if you look him up. He drew the countryside and the man on the street. And luckily, because he got along with people, in spite of his lofty position in the court, he was not decapitated during the Revolution. His drawings were in my home as I grew up. Catherine Bigelow Lord and her husband, William Swift Lord, used the time out in the Depression to make art in their home. They made jigsaw puzzles. She would make the art covering, and he got jigsaws to carve out the very special interlocking pieces. Those puzzles were in our home as I grew up. And when she gave me all of the drawings and paintings that she did for 2 books, that were in full color, and she could never get published because in the Depression and in the years that she was trying to publish, there were no books in full color. Well, thanks to a Smith friend and Lulu, we now have those books. And finally, Aunt Renee, my mother's younger sister, would come to visit. She was unmarried for years, and she painted everywhere and lived in Florence and was just saturated with the best education possible. But when she visited, her palette with all of her very expensive oil paint would be in the refrigerator on top of the leftover dessert or the sandwich fixings for tomorrow. So, as I said, art was everywhere. When I went to high school in Monterey, California, completely different culture from Pittsburgh, and a Catholic school at that, I met by reputation Sister Corita Kent. She was booming in LA at the time with her happenings and at the Immaculate College. And she was making art with marketing concepts. She had words as well as enchantment with color and abstraction. So she could draw you into her aspirations. And the other person who made a big difference in my life was a man from Brooklyn, Ben Bishop, who thumbed his way out to the West Coast to get a degree in Berkeley, talked them into it. And he would show up to do studio art with all kinds of little tiny art reproduction books that he could whip out of his pocket and show you the answer to your painting question with no words exchanged. And my friend Roz Sommer, who paints in Cambridge, says, I don't talk when I paint. I don't even think in words. Well, he did the same for us. He would catch us in a flummox about our work, and he'd just pull out a picture and hand it to us. He also did the art history class and would take slides from Berkeley and show him. He would push the camera, the projector up to the wall so that Vermeer was a mere 8x10, which it truly was. Or he'd pull it all the way back so we'd have de Kooning, which would be huge. And he taught me about charcoal drawings, Cycladic Isles, Vermeer, and the Bay Area figurative painters who were all very new at the time. Okay. Then I attended Smith. And the most important man in the art department there, their big credential, was Leonard Baskin. He was a ghost of a professor. He showed up the first day. He said, in 5 minutes, I'm going to leave and ask your questions now because my assistant will pick up your portfolio at the end of the semester. Any questions? But he basically taught us by example. He was a great ghost. We were all terrified by what he would think of what we were doing, and he was never there. I've never replicated that teaching style, but you have to admit, if it works, go for it. On the big red poster of Sitting Bull was a $3 purchase from the government when he did the Sitting Bull stamp, but and the little wood engraving on the right. I got in a thrift shop in Boston, but they show his style of dramatic black line, either exquisite tiny details like a Dürer or with crow quills or big paint brushes that made big bold marks. And you'll see, I think, in the work that I created over the years, that man who was never in the classroom had an effect. And the other one, Elliot Offner, had us working with chisels, carving wood, making sculptures. I did a big foot, and he liked it. And he was making winged birds, and winged men were sort of a thing in those days. This is a photograph I took of him from my photography class. And Elliot and I were both in a show in Chesterwood years later. And he asked me if I'd come to see his piece. And my daughter was with me at the time. And I said, oh, really? You have a piece here? I thought you'd come to see mine. Anyway, we had a good sport with each other over the years. And he did jury me into a show in Chesterwood after that. And the next one, we had a miracle of George Cohen left for a sabbatical, and in his place to do painting and putting in a welding shop was Richard Hunt from Chicago. He was in his 30s at the time. He's still alive. He's still producing. Please Google him. Look him up. The Wikipedia is loaded with story. I mean, the man was astonishing. He said things like, sculpture gives form to feeling and moment, and steel was the medium of the 20th century. He set up a welding studio, but I didn't join. I had no idea what I would do with a car bumper. I do now. So I've gone back in time with the memory of watching him work with the cherished few who took time with him. But when he taught us painting, you'll see later, he taught well. So he'd made that sculpture on the right when he was 23. When he taught at Smith, he was in his 30s, and he's now, I think, in his late 80s or 90s. This was David Batchelder. He ran the photo lab. Photography was now art. This was a whole kind of f-stop 64 Weston, West Coast idea. And well, not really. It was David Smith. It was Cartier-Bresson from France, all of us, and Steichen. Photography was no longer just journalism. It was now art. And so it was part of the art department at Smith, and David Batchelder was very much into making his own very artistic prints, but he was a kind and wonderful teacher. And one of the great things he did was help my friend Sally, who was a year younger, start her animation. He set up a 16mm movie stand for her. And 3 years later, she had a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. So these are stellar faculty and great people, even if they don't show up. So here's what I did. So some examples I still have of work I did on cheap old newsprint from 1968. Very demure, very, I just come out of a convent school, for Pete's sake. So here I was doing figures and enjoying sumi brush and watercolor in the studio. Okay. Then etching with Mr. Baskin. That was interesting. He had told us there was a book that we could all read and figure out how to do it. I have 2 etchings here, this and the next. It's as far as I got with aqua tint and gum arabic and dry point. And years later, my friend Lisa Hauk, a great teacher and great artist, would straighten me out and explain how indeed you do make etchings. But these aren't bad. Little 5x7s from no teacher at all. Okie doke. This is a plein air painting that I did when Richard Hunt was helping with the painting. He taught us what's called limited palette. You get 7 tubes of paint, a cold and warm yellow, cold and warm red, cold and warm blue, and white. That's it. Everything else you mix. And acrylic was new in the 60s. It dried quickly. And so I made best friends with that paint. And this is a painting I did at Smith in 1968. I still have it. I'm still proud of it. And my animator friend Sally looked at it and said, that's almost really good. Okay. And my friend David Batchelder, when he looked at my photographs in my portfolio at the end of the year, he said, you know what? I like what you do with people. And many of the images I took in that student life of mine, I used later for drawings, or I used later for other things. So this also is evidence that the climate in Northampton was full of snow and ice in the winter. Okay. In the summer of 1969, while men were on the moon, my generation was in the mud, half clothed and on drugs in Woodstock. I was in a dirndl studying the Renaissance in Vienna with this amazing man. Another Wikipedia episode for all of you. Look him up. Let me see if I can find my notes. But he was at the Albertina, at that time an assistant, and later, before he died, he would become the director. He whipped us all over Austria and Germany to see churches and museums. And he talked about the Italian influence on the German Renaissance and the German influence on the Italian Renaissance. And every time I looked at these altarpieces, I would see faces of movie stars from movies. You know, they just looked like people I already knew. It was a distraction, but I did love it. And these things, I think, just went deep inside me. And one of the funny things was, though, in the Albertina, they were so good at making reproductions that they would take your money, let you walk through the galleries and say thank you. And everyone was looking at reproductions. All the real ones were up in the library where we were studying. But when I looked him up, Conrad, he worked at Harvard for years and also the Albertina, but he uncovered the worst and most famous of all guys who were faking paintings, the forger Eric Hebern. And he sold a lot to the Morgan Library. And it was Conrad who figured it out, because 3 or 4 different artists at the Morgan were all using the same paper from different centuries. Okay. One of the things he pointed out was that Dürer, who was the big gun in the collection, collected and adored Martin Schongauer, Schaum being the beautiful. So the beautiful man, Martin. And I have to say, I did fall in love with Martin myself. I love the exquisite minimalism of that halo, the absolutely blank wall behind the Madonna, and then the rendering of all of that outfit, that dress, that skirt, all curled and crumpled and like a cloud, like she's floating. And then again, the bare nothing on the ground where she's without gravity holding that child who has the funniest halo I've ever seen. And in my life, I did make a lot of Madonnas. And I think it was Suki Lessard at the time. I was young and married, making Madonnas all over the place. She said, "Why are you making so many Madonnas?" And I had no answer, except that I felt that everyone did. That's what they did in art. And there's one I made when I first learned to cut steel. Now, in the May of 1970, I was on the strike committee at Smith because my roommates, my housemates, Jean Husson and Kelly Brennan, were sort of running it. And we abandoned the classroom to protest the murders at Kent State, the Vietnam War, the lack of information about government activity in bombing of Cambodia, the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. All of it was nonsensical, and we weren't allowed to talk about it in the classrooms. So we sat under trees and we had big meetings and lots of actions. And the outcry from at the end, I would make posters at night and tack them on trees. And then in the morning, they'd be taken away. But at the end of a week of this, too many meetings with women, I just felt that for some reason, people were not, their actions were, and their intents weren't deep enough. They felt superficial to me. They were cheering and clapping, but they weren't going to go anywhere with it. And the poster on the left is the last one of the silk screens I did for the strike. And I had that one copy, and I've had it all this years. And the dove is a bit bloated, and his word strike is kind of small, and his little fist is kind of impotent. And who knew that Me Too would be an important slogan, 50 years later. Okay. So what did I do? I went with a professor, Don Robinson at Smith, put together a student lobby. What you do is you become a lobby. And if you care about something, you go to New York and you sit in an office and you call people up, because it was 70. There was no computers. There was no cell phones. There were tie lines, and they were free because long distance calls cost a lot of money. So I met a team of 3 graduate students from Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy who shared the office of John Gentry and Willard Wirtz, who'd been in the Johnson administration. They were publishing position papers for foreign policy, and we shared a rental near the zoo where I would go in the evening to draw. My job on the lobby was not to write position papers. It was to make phone calls based on those papers, given lists of alumni. But this drawing of the eagle that came from some corner of my pocketbook, where I must have had a quill pen and a jar of ink, ended up on their publications. Well, my mother was on the phone when Smith called and said they had a job posting that I should interview. She found me, whether it was Willard Wirt's office or the rental, somehow or other. She had a number for me. I got the interview and I was hired. So that fall, I had my first job as an art teacher. And thanks to David Batchelder, I knew how to run a black and white studio. And thanks to Smith, I'd taken a course in how to teach art. So the charcoal self-portrait on the right was a demo the first day of class. Here, this is how you do charcoal. I imitated Mr. Bishop, my high school teacher. And my photo class took all the senior portraits and faculty and staff photos for the yearbook. It was the first yearbook at that school to include the kitchen staff. In January of 1971, Family Connections led to a dinner with a nearby Long Island family. And by Easter, I was engaged to their eldest son. The following Labor Day, we were married. And really, in those years, my blood was running thick with printing and taking photographs, thinking of them as art. Partially journalism of the time and place, but also with an element of design and structure and lighting. All that Renaissance lighting would be choices in my decisions to make photographs. And also this book, or this exhibit in 1955, really turned the corner for photography from merely journalism to a branch of philosophy, a branch of not only art, but humanism. And I believe this publication was very important to me then, and it still is. It crossed all boundaries and served as an illustration of human equality. When I was married in New York City, our brownstone flat owner and friend hired me to work for Mayor Lindsay's prison health department. My job was to collect a significant sample of prison entry and exit dates for the detainee population and compute an average length of stay. What you don't know is that I had an advanced placement in math at that high school in order to get into Smith before I decided to be an art major. So I really could hang with this. I could do it. By law, the average length of stay was not to exceed 90 days. And my study showed that it was at least a year and a half. Now, to get to Rikers Island, where the prisons were, it was a long commute on the A train, and I learned about the Far Rockaways. At this time in New York City, there was a brand new magazine called New York, launched and invited photographers to send in photo essays. Well, I worked on several, and this one is the Far Rockaways, and you can see the top of the housing is the A train. And here's another example from that photo essay. I love this place. And then the next one, somebody at home up on stilts. I thought all of this was National Geographic dug up villages, but no, this was the end of the A train. Well, it didn't, my essays weren't included in New York Magazine. I guess they might have decided this wasn't exactly their ideal marketing territory, but I loved these pictures ever since the day I took them with my brother-in-law, who's no longer with us, Larry White. Well, the other thing that happened was that I was teaching in a St. David's school on the east side, and I got a job teaching in the YMHA preschool art down on 14th Street. And the manager there handed me this book and said, "We need you to teach animation, so figure it out. Make a movie, show it to me, and I'll decide." Well, my husband didn't show up for dinner every night because he was on call as a physician. So I could make an animation with a dragon in it, for instance, that was composed of sequins that I would push around, shoot, push, shoot, push, shoot, but which would leave a few sequins on the carpet and here and there in the house, along with dragon tongues and eyeballs and all the other pieces that you make and push around and then film and then sweep up and put somewhere safe when someone's coming home to dinner. So that I did learn to do this, and I started teaching animation in New York City. We also took a subway train to JFK flew 24 hours to New Delhi, India. We traveled in northern India and Nepal. My daddy gave me two Zeiss single lens reflex cameras, SLRs. Remember what those were? And I used one for slides in color and the other for black and white film. I shot photographs everywhere. I had fewer clothes than film. We were there for a month. And children would laugh at me because the portrait lens on one of my cameras was so big and it seemed to show my eyeball. So when I was shooting, they could see my eyeball, and it worked out beautifully. Everybody was smiling in my pictures. But during my career that would eventually occur in IT, and I worked in IT for 30 years, I would always talk about my visit to India with the many, many coworkers who had come from that continent. And here's some children up in Nepal. I had lots of rolls of film, and I went back to New York, here's Goa, India, and developed them all in Long Island. I had a husband who was rarely home, so I could go out and use a darkroom in Long Island at a friend's basement. And I still have many of these prints. And I recently made a sculpture of a fisherman based on the fisherman in Goa, and it was shown in Jamestown, Rhode Island. And then we didn't use a subway to get here. We had to buy a Jeep, and I had to learn to drive a clutch. And Ben we lived on the Navajo reservation for 2 years. Ben served in Indian Public Health Service as an alternate to service in Vietnam. I was a volunteer in the high school, in the graphics department, running a photo lab and a printing press. The superintendent of the high school was from New York City, and he had a marketing background. He asked me to create a photo essay of the derelict campus, the trailers, the mud, the broken windows and graffiti, in order to raise awareness and funds for the repairs. These are some of the photos. And I want to say, in the photo lab that I ran, the girls that were with me in the darkroom, would help me print some of those pictures from Nepal. I was showing them how to do it. And we used my negatives. And when they saw the pictures of those children in Nepal, they said, "Where are these beautiful people? Where did they come from?" And of course, part of living on the reservation was to do the history of the whole movement of those peoples from the archipelago across the Alaska, to Alaska from China down into South America. So we had all kind of studied that to get there. And here they were in the darkroom saying, "Where did these beautiful people come from?" So that's
Just giving you a quick time check.
The superintendent loaned me his Hasselblad. I was pregnant at the time, and so I had a built-in tripod. These photos worked. He got the campus clean and fun, and I was paid for my very first photo essay. In the evenings, I would go across the street from our clinic to the compound, which was, there was a boarding school there. And I did animated films because I had all that equipment that I'd used in New York, brought it with me, brought it to the boarding school, and had 9-year-olds do a parallel universe of make their animated films, which the 9-year-olds in New York would be very careful to make sure no one was making the same film. One would do basketball, one would do a plant growing, one would do a car race. But on the reservation, the children only wanted to make the same film altogether. So there was a big cultural aha for me. Animation was loved in both sides, but there were two very different cultures. So here we go. Now, our son was born in an Indian hospital in Gallup, New Mexico in 1974. July 75, we returned to live on North Road in Bedford, in Massachusetts, with our baby and 2 Navajo Nation dogs. In 1977, our daughter was born in Boston, and we moved to Dudley Road soon after. My art creating was sort of on pause. Eventually, in brief moments, I could draw the children. These are 2 cut steel portraits from my photos of my children once I learned how to cut steel. My baby daughter with a friend, and my son, his first guitar was his tennis racket. Eventually, my children became artists too. How could they You know, there was very little play school toys. There was art equipment. My son drew dragons, and Elizabeth, who's on the call, owns this one, and I took this photo in her home. So thank you. And he would draw on the metal for me, and I would cut them out. And then we sold them in a gallery in Long Island. And they were even mentioned in a write-up about the gallery in the New York Times Island section. And he drew these when he was 5. My daughter's painting on the other side of that picture was full of clouds. She drew spectacular clouds all her childhood and her adulthood. Her huge, large landscape paintings are filled with clouds. She's designed wallpaper, is an interior designer, and I'm very proud of her art as well. Now, these musicians were the result of a friend owning and running a restaurant in Cambridge called the Peasant Stop. They were doing musical evenings. Elizabeth, who's on the call, was part of that. And they wanted big pictures of musicians to put on the brick walls. I still had my wood cutting tools from Smith, and I still had a pile of National Geographics that I would ravage for stories and pictures and help my children with their homework. Because remember, there was no internet, there was no Google. And I found these 2 pictures, a street musician from Amsterdam and an Afghan playing his flute to his sheep. He was 108 years old, and he said in the article that at this time in his life, music was his only friend. More musicians, Mary Catherine, who was part of that restaurant, playing her cello, and the quartet. Now, the funny thing is, a doctor's wife at a hospital Christmas party said she'd love to put she'd seen some of my work, she wanted to put it in the Pingree School gallery. So we framed up a lot of these prints, we put them in the Pingree School gallery, had a reception. And one of the students was standing with his hands behind his back, looking up at that quartet. I'd taken great pains to spell the word Haydn backwards. So when it printed, it would print forward. But he looked at me and he said, "You make that? They're all backwards." And he's right. I didn't make the musicians backwards in order to have them play forwards. So the title of this is now the Backwards Quartet. Smart kid, idiot artist. Also, I was kind of looking at all of the single block linoleum cuts that Picasso was doing or had done. And I went to a big sawmill near us in Littleton. And I would get big planks of pine, but I didn't want to have to get 3 planks of pine to make one print. So I figured out a way to use each plank for multiple colors. So in these 2 examples, I would cut away the white and print blue or print green and red, and then cut away again and ink the black. So some of that black is on top of blue. So those are each examples of single block. And of course, these were hanging on laundry lines all over the house, and the chips of wood were all over the floor, and my kids were really nice about it. Okay. Now, a good friend of mine took me to the Alpha Gallery in Boston. Her friend ran it, and she loved the paintings of Bernard Chayet, who was teaching at Yale at the time. And I found out that you don't have to paint a background. You could just paint the thing and a shadow. And so that magical new paint, the acrylic paint that dried so quickly, I came up with a whole new scheme to make art, and my friends loved it. And we'd trade around for childcare and dinner, and leftovers and this and that around the neighborhood for food paintings. My friends who were running a fancy restaurant would have extra food and they would get a painting. And you can imagine who was president when I did the peanuts. A neighbor had a birthday always near Palm Sunday, and the mackerel that was inexpensive and delicious, if very, very fresh from a Belmont fish store, would grace my table. So I made him a painting of mackerels because he was my favorite mackerel snapper. Now, one of the things I did a lot of was enrichment in the schools. And I still had all my silkscreen equipment from Smith somehow, and all packing about. I still had it all. And I was delighted to work in the school they had an artist invasion of dancing, and they did choreography with every single class, and every class would rehearse and then they would do their choreographed dance. And I worked with artists when the rehearsals were going on to make drawings of the dancing. And then I made silk screens posters for the event. And I believe that when you want to get some good art, you start with the children. Okie doke. I also did pamphlets for the League of Women Voters. Believe it or not, the ERA we were fighting about it back then to get all the states to vote. And I believe it didn't happen until just last year, 2019. We extended the deadline. Now, remember, this was before computers and printers and typefaces. You had to buy little press-on letters. And I said, nuts with that. I'm going to just draw the letters. So this was maybe my Renaissance training or who knows what, or a little bit of Corita or a little bit of this and that. But I would make the League of Women Voters let me make their pamphlet kits. I was also painting. And thanks to acrylic, I could paint quickly. And thanks to National Geographics, I could find subjects. And the cool thing about this one is that the one called Trek of the Girl Scouts coming up the mountain, it won a prize at the Bedford Town Common Town Day show. And a woman came up to me named Ilonka Laurent. And she said, I like your painting. I want you to help me. I want to go to night school. I want to go welding, but I can't drive. And my husband is dead, so he won't care. Will you please drive me to welding classes? So magic. I started my career with the torch and the welder, thanks to this painting and a wonderful widow named Ilonka Laurent. So I attended night school with her and learned to cut steel and to weld. And one of the very first things I cut with sheets of steel, I would get it, now EPA sites, but then covered with steel and other grimy things. Very cheap, a lot cheaper than paper, were these charming girls who were part of a night school I did in Manhattan at a neighborhood house. They were in my photography class, and we all took portraits of each other and printed them. So this was my portrait of them. That was the photograph I used to make that first cut steel piece. The house would fill up with cut steel pieces. They'd be sheets of steel with drawings or things that were getting ready to go to the shop to get welded to a base. And I was photographing them on sheets of paper at the stairwell, and my daughter sat in front of them and said, Mom, don't you want to take my picture? And eventually it all worked out, and we had a good time with the metal in the house. We would move it off the couch and the chairs in order to have dinner, and they learned to live with it. Now, in Bedford, many of my friends were Minutemen, and they called themselves Minutemen, and I called themselves reenactors, but they didn't like that. They were Minutemen. And a friend of mine asked me to make a cut steel portrait of her husband for his birthday. And she handed me lots of pictures from the Minutemen encampments. So I made several small Minutemen cutouts for her. And at the same time, the Cambridge Historical Commission put out a call for art to put sculpture into Fort Washington in Cambridge, which was going to be paved over, but then the Historical Commission and Minutemen groups chipped in money to save it. It was a bermed, cannoned fort under Washington. And then the DAR came along and turned it into a park with elm trees and a fence. It had all fallen apart. And they wanted to put it back together, but there was a state law that said 1% of that budget had to be sculpture. And so I ended up getting the commission because I had several cutouts to show what I could do. And then with real reenactment photographs of real men in real uniforms, I composed this setup. It's there today, Fort Washington, Cambridge, Mass. A dear friend in Bedford came to help to photograph me working on it. So that the ones that went into the park are life size. There's some models there that were to show the Cambridge group what I was going to do to get their permission. And so they got the models. And there I am cutting. And this was like 3 years after I learned how to do this. I got a public art. Now, at the same time, Helen Caldecott had the doomsday clock set to 2 minutes to midnight. And my children were now getting on a school bus every morning and not coming back until the afternoon. And Nixon was president, and his ambassador to Russia was named Thomas Watson Jr. He was the son of the founder of IBM. And he came back from Russia and wrote a huge, long, full-page letter to the editor about what we need to do to stop the madness. And it spoke to me. And I pulled together all my shoebox, remember those, full of photographs of my neighbors and this and that. And I wanted to illustrate his speech, but I had to cut the words out a lot, make them shorter, because cutting words in steel takes forever. But you can see that he had some very emphatic things to say. But I think it was also Carita who used words with art that was enchanting, gave me the sort of permission to try and do this. And here's the letter he wrote back. Dear Mrs. White, thank you very much for your interesting letter. And he summarized, I do think you're working in the right direction, Thomas Watson. And so he accepted my edits and condensations of his words and let me attribute those words to him. And here was his final sentence in that article. And I think we can all take it to heart. It's still very vital. And if Tim Thompson is on, this is, of course, the house across the street from your home in Lyndonville. This was the photograph that I used for this poster. And then we have that League of Women Voters again, and Stormy Seas. Well, this was 1981 that I made this drawing. I think I was looking at French drawings of weather at the time, French paintings. But it was a difficult time for our family. And we were separated in 84 and divorced by 86. And my family we left Bedford and moved to Winchester in 1987 in a new house where they could walk to school or skateboard, as my son would do it. And they said it was like living in the TV show Happy Days. And so we survived and moved on, but there wasn't much time for art. In 1987, I was working full-time in a computer school that I had just attended for 18 months, but then I was on my way to an 11-year gig at a gas and electric company. I was still taking photographs with cameras and often hidden throwaway cameras. I had coats with holes in the pocket. I really was keen on man on the street pictures, and I didn't want to hold something up to my eyeball to click. So I was walking around New York City and Cambridge and parts of my life with throwaway cameras on the dashboard of my car or in holy pockets. And now this man was begging in Manhattan. My son and I were walking the same street. We had no money for the subway, so we had no money to give him. But he caught my eye and he was shrieking, Jesus God, give me some money. And I say that occasionally in my own life. The woman was walking by and that was her shadow. He lives in my kitchen. I see him every day. War's Doorstep is another sort of way at looking at grim stories. We were living through the war in Kuwait and other places all over. In 2008 and all the years preceding, there was a lot of grim stories. And I felt that if it got out of the news that was on your doorstep in a newspaper all rolled up and lay there, the story that was happening in the world, if that was delivered to your front door, then maybe you would feel that you needed to move your little inches of legislation or calls to people to do things. So that lobbyist in my heart was coming out in my art. This was cut out of a steel door, so I left the hinges on it. Now I started painting people from my photographs of people. I was frustrated with the very flatness of those cut steel drawings, and I turned to my paintings. This was easier. There was no frame needed. There was no background. It was great. And Alex Katz, a very fancy artist in New York, was also painting aluminum cutouts, but he had money and time, so he painted both sides. If you turn these around, there would be no painting. Here's some more. Now, you can imagine these were in the kitchen. They were on the table. They were unpainted. They were painted. They were half done. And the children would look at me and say, "Mom, who wants these?" Well, 30 years later, my friend James Thompson invited a number of these to be part of a retrospective in the Asheville Museum in North Carolina. And I called him up on a phone and cell phone, I believe, and said, "You see, these people wanted them." It took a while. It was one of those extended jokes that took a number of years to finish. I did a lot of bench people and couples. I think of tourists as an image of who we all are. We're touring. We're here from start to finish, but not forever. I did the postman, and I did the Texaco manager, and he was lying on the laundry table in the basement getting painted. And I came down with an armful of laundry into the basement, and my own painting scared me half to death. I thought there was a man in my basement, and I threw all the laundry. And then I realized, oh, no, it's just my painting. Well, I was very lucky to live in Winchester. It was a great family plan because there were a lot of people throwing out all of their old appliances, the stoves and the refrigerators, which had beautiful 50s enamel steel covers, and especially the stoves. They came in all colors: pink, yellow, turquoise, avocado. And I would go to the dump on Saturdays and take them all apart and go home with a car full of enamel panels, which helped me get this gig, designing both a garden and an installation for the city of Chicago when they opened up Millennium Park. Now, you notice it's Grant Park, which is where in the Democratic Convention hoopla in 1968, that's where there were a lot of protests. So it was like the DAR coming and making a garden with a fence and trees in the fort where poor Washington and his men were hiding behind cannons. But there it is. I did it. And what else? Oh, because of that Fort Washington installation, I was invited to put a proposal in for the city of Whitensville, or town of Whitensville, Mass. After 9/11, they really cared about policemen and firemen. Had a number of their own had died in big fires in Worcester when they loaned them out. And they really felt for the national spirit of all those first call folks after 9/11. None of their own townsfolk died in 9/11, but they wanted a memorial, and they liked the Minutemen. And so they got in touch with me, and they set me up with a welding and a cutting shop. They took care of me. We bought the steel. We got a girder to put under it that was tortured so it would look like it came from the city. And they installed this in 2003. I think it was the first permanent 9/11 memorial in New England, if not the country. But it wasn't all grim. Sometimes you have fun. One of my neighbors in Winchester would come over and cut steel or have something welded. And one day I came home and there was a whole street plate. It's an inch thick, or 3/4 inch, and it's 8 by 6. And it's lying in my driveway. And he said, "I thought you could use it." Now, a street plate gets hooked and carried around with a hole in the center that has a bar across so they can hook it and lift it and put it on a truck. So the drawing was needed to be a drawing that had a hole in a certain spot. And I loved this postcard that I found at the MIT Coop. And so I made it fit the sheet and drew it and cut it out and took it to Tiverton, Rhode Island. And I believe that's the last place I saw it. I could never afford to bring it back home. My daughter got into college and met a man and decided to get married. And couture came back to me. I'd sewn clothes as a child, and now I was very excited about putting together a wedding and dresses and dances and fancified men. I was also working at the Federal Reserve at the time, and bow ties was a way of just pinning men to the wall like a butterfly collection. Anyway, there you have it. No more explanations. I also, because I was working with art on the edges of my life, all that enamel that I'd collected in Winchester would turn quickly into little critters. And my friend up in New Hampshire, Patricia Carriga, had me make some for a summer to a Squam Lake fundraiser. And I think I've cut up the very, very last piece of Winchester enamel steel this summer. I made all those blue donkeys after the last election. Now, this is where I've ended up. The scrap pile in Winchester was good for sheets of enamel, but this is the real deal. This is like the kingdom of Wall-E, if you know that animated film. This is where I now go to get my scraps. And if you'll notice in my arms, I'm carrying a bundle of galvanized metal strips that have holes, these lovely crumpled things. I went digging everywhere in that big pile, hoping it wouldn't tumble, to pull all of those that I could find, because I love them. I had no idea what to do with them, but I brought them home. This is one of the creatures that grew up in my Winchester driveway. He's 10 feet tall. It started with the head. When you get pieces that look like something, then you just add to them. And I made this head on a table that looked like a giraffe, and so I had to find the rest. He is now at the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. When I was working there for 11 years, I met the woman who bought art for the region, for the bank. And after I left, she called me up one day and said, "You have anything big? We're trying to make the place more friendly." Well, they came by to my new home in Dudley, and they bought the ostrich, and they bought the giraffe, they bought a Mr. Bojangles and an angel, which is upstairs on the terrace. Remember those galvanized scraps that were all squiggly? Well, they turned into 2 sheep and a Swan Lake. The Swan Lake started with that sort of refrigerator handle that lifts and goes, and that looked to me like the nose of a swan. In Pittsburgh, we did ballet and opera and concerts, and I just love the ballet more than anything. So I made a ballerina with that fan for a tutu, and she's in the middle of becoming a swan or a princess. It's hard to tell. And that's the New England Sculptors Association is a great organization that lets sculptors place things on historic properties. And this was the Eustis Estate in Milton. Now, one of the things I always dream of is working small and having somebody else make it big. And there was a call for art to propose for large sculptures at the park in Beverly, Mass, on the corner of a huge old shoe factory that was going to become a set of condos. And I found that very day what they call a shoe last, which is the iron that they would put to cobble together a shoe. And I welded to it a big screw for a heel, some funny like ankle wrap and clips at the toe. And it became an homage to the machinery, to the designers, to the people who ran the machinery, and the fancy lady who would walk to her soiree in these lovely shoes. So I proposed this. I got a group in Providence to make proposal for the real function. I found people who could fabricate something 12 feet based on a 15-inch model. And they gave us all $100 and said, "Thank you for your proposals, but we're not going to do anything." So there it sits. Now, this is my garage today with my pre-art pile and my work in the back and my, angle grinders and my welder, my stick welder, and my gas. When we lived in Winchester, where you saw the giraffe, it was a big pile. And when I had the place all cleaned up to sell it and move here to Dudley, I sent the kids a picture of the tidied up place that was where they lived. And they looked at it and wrote back, "We had a driveway?" They'd never seen it before. It was always covered up. So here I am working with scraps, nothing flat anymore, the real deal. And this is sort of, I start with laying things out on the ground, and then I eventually find ways to hold them together with my hands and weld them with the other one. Oh yeah, one hand is holding, one hand is welding. I don't have more than two. The donkey is a 5-year effort. The rocker, go ahead, it's fine. It takes a while to find all the parts. The rocker has been almost a 6-year effort. He's even more fit than he is in these photos, but he's now in Lakeland, Florida, on loan for a year. He was a model after my son, who played in a rock and roll band in the high school. and my grandson, who bleached his hair blonde for a minute and had it all over his head in a glorious pile. And who's next? Oh yeah, I love my garden, my perennials. I love today seeing the iris burst out. Lilies are coming; they're bursting out of the ground. And as with all my work, it starts with the scraps. If I can't find an interesting scrap, I have nothing to work with. So I can't make a cougar out of these scraps. I have to make a flower out of them. I can't make what people want. I have to make what I can see and find. The iris is painted, they're both painted. Now this one, I started quite a long time ago, 7 years ago. My parents had died. A good friend was dying. That was called Grief. So the original version is on the right. And the current version is on the left. And it's retitled Still Standing. And he is a poem to me about the onslaught that you just think you can't take one more. It could even be the pandemic. And whether it's the Constitution or economic justice or the environment, there's lots of things that we have to stand up to. I know he wants me to retitle him Falling in Love, and that will happen someday. Okay. Torso and core are examples of finding scraps that only go so far. I started torso in the Afghanistan war when IEDs were going off and blowing people up, and it just looked like shrapnel to people. So I gave it the name torso and decided it was more of a Roman piece that the Vandals had destroyed. Because if they're going to show them in museums without arms and heads and legs, why can't I? And then core was a longer version with the same kind of core elements. What does it take to be human? What does it take to be whole? And if you can't find the head, don't worry about it. And Magdalena Konowitz is an influence for me to play like that. She put all kinds of people together with missing limbs. And this group was actually at Smith College. I'd seen her work for years. There was a huge show at the De Cordova when I lived in Bedford. She's a sort of a spirit guide for me. And this was our friend Richard Hunt, who was 30 when I met him and 23 when he built this in Chicago, talking about steel being the medium of the century and being the way we transport our feelings and our emotions and the signs of the time. I found this while looking him up because of this request to talk to you. If you hadn't asked me to talk to you, Molly and Wayne, I wouldn't have found this. And so I'm so grateful to see something that just makes my heart throb and to know that I met this man and worked with him even briefly. And here, again, I found another piece of his, an Icarus, and my own version of Icarus, which started with that scrap, that sort of lined up shutter of steel that was all crumpled, and the rest of him sort of showed up to be in that scale. So I put Richard and me together on the same slide, vain old me, but I really appreciate what he did, and he's still with us. I may write him a letter. Now, you remember all those angels I saw in the Renaissance when I went to Europe? While people were on the moon or at Woodstock. Well, I keep making angels. This is Angel Gabriel. I went to the Russian Icon Museum in Clinton, Mass., which was featuring art about Mary. And of course, it was the Annunciation everywhere. But the Russians and I believe that angels are not necessarily soft. They can be archangels, they can be warriors, and yet they can offer you a flower. And one winter was just so darn cold. I couldn't go out to the garage and weld. So I played with wire and made drawings in the house. And I stitched those drawings to linen and showed them in Concord. And don't ever turn down an opportunity at a realtor. You'd be surprised. They'll snap them right up. And here's me comparing myself to Mr. Juror. And I believe he's in the sort of overdone and I'm in the underdone world, if this is food. Now this one is our poster child. And this one happened in 2016, probably December. And it was just my outrage and my self, uncontained self it results in a 4-year span of coexisting. And I did a Pied Piper of lemmings following a rather rattled leader. And if you remember my friend Baskin back at Smith, he loved big, bold blocks of form and shape and then squinchy little lines. So he'll probably want to take credit for this someday when we meet up. Okay, here's another one, the Women's March in January 17. I was in the metal yard while the women were in Boston, but it turns out I found all these pieces that very day. And notice she's standing on a crumpled saw blade. Now, recently we had a march in Boston about guns. All the mothers and the grannies were told to wait on the common with the men, of course, and the children were going to march in from Dorchester. So all the teenagers did the marching and we waited for the speeches. And I love the signs, and it's never ending, but there's a good crowd. And this one is dedicated to those kids. It's called Walk the Walk. And I was working on it at the time of those shootings. And it came from a potato chip can that was orange, that was so crumpled, it looked like a hoodie. And the legs were in that posture and they looked like torn jeans, the way the kids do them. And I'd had that moon orifice scrap forever, never knew what to do with it. And I ended up making this sort of snazzy teenager, neither he, she, a they, walking with pride and speaking golden thoughts to all of us to behave and to prepare and to think things through. It's cheerful like Carita. I hope it's enchanting, but I hope it also carries with it a message. And then these are just downright outrage. There's the detainee who is hurting to the core, who's just emptied and hopeless, his head bent over. There's the refugee, made of my scrappiest scraps, the ones that look like torn cloth, that are semi-rotted on the edges. His shoes are completely worn out. And then there's the women are coming, and I painted it to look like copper, so that the Statue of Liberty would be furious and off her pedestal and coming after anyone who said, oh, we'll only take the rich ones, thank you. More angels. They just keep showing up and I keep making them. And this was a COVID challenge. And if Suzanne is on the line, she said she signed up, hello. She called me up during COVID and said, make me an apron. She's out in LA. She owns one of my couture, one of my dresses. Her colorist had shown up, seen the dress and said, I need an apron. So she called up and said, give me an apron. Well, all I had was my scrap pile. The dump had been closed for 6 months, but in the scrap pile, I found the steel neck piece, a copper scrap with a black trim of tar at the edge, 2 ceiling tiles of tin in those lovely colors, a tie of copper, and believe it or not, an antique furnace brush. So I couldn't weld it. I had to stitch it together with copper and black wires. But it hangs from a nail as if it were a real apron in her friend's house. Now, this is recent. Here we are, close to the mark. This is what I've been doing recently. These are tall. This guy's 6 feet, and he's called Violence in the News. And I don't care which direction it's coming from. It's coming from everywhere. But my children were marching for Black Lives Matter last year when we visited. We're all doing what we can. And I make this because it helps me speak to the moment. This one is called Empathy. I came home with my sort of couture head with that gorgeous kimono of a jacket, punched out with squares and rectangles. And I said, God only knows what I'll do with this. But I ended up with another scrap that was ageless and long and curvy with no place to go. But I put them together. And in one day, I had a piece that I call Empathy. It's a spiritual being coming to give you a hug in the times when we couldn't do that. And here's something that used to be back to back. You can see the base is kind of funny, 2 L's stuck together, because it used to be the fat end stuck together. They were back to back with no arms, and it was called Not Talking. Well, I cut it up. I got tired of that. We had a new election. We have hope in our hearts. So I put them back. I put them talking, and I gave them arms. And I burnished the silvery steel one to be shiny, and I colored up with oil to the brown. And there they are. And it's sort of, yes, we can. I've got a dream. And here's my change agent, 6 feet. He's multicolored. He's red and brown and silver and other colors of gray and blue. And he's like our archangels. He's going to go to work, and he's going to be there for you, and he's part of you. But it isn't all austere. Here's crazy Mr. Exhausted made of exhaust pipes. It was COVID. I had nothing left in my scrap pile. I had things I had no idea what to do with. So I decided to weld them all together into this snarl. There's a man named Gilbert Boro who does really beautiful snarled up steel down in Connecticut. Well, it gave me permission to make this guy. I left the original silvery tip, but painted the pipes, and he's called Exhausted, which is kind of how we all felt. An ancestor is from the Navajo world, where they did rainbow people and their sand paintings and their blankets. They bring their ancestors into every prayer. And I'm praying a lot and doing the same. Now, this one is an homage to John Chamberlain, whose retrospective at the Guggenheim I walked in up and down until it closed. What that man can do with crumpled cars is like no one else in the world. And he listened to Richard Hunt saying steel is the medium of the century. And he was marvelous. So this is an homage to him. And the next slide is a picture of what he did. So you can see he's dead now, so he can't say, you're stealing from me. I'm not. I'm homaging you, dear John. I love what you did. And recently, a bunch of scraps became a city, a dachshund, and there was a call for art for robots. Well, that's as close as I could get to a robot. This is Pocahontas and John Smith, and it's for a UFO gallery at Art Space in Maynard. And their tagline was, "Take me to your leader." But as I recall, John Smith said to Pocahontas, "Take me away from your leader." But they accepted it anyway into the robot gift shop. And remember all those art organizations that have been my lifelines that we talked about at the beginning? Well, the Arts Worcester gave me a grant to buy new equipment and try to work on stainless and take some lessons and learn a new technique. So these are my results so far. And thank you, Arts Worcester. And thank you all. Here we are, 50 years later. This is a sculpture called Good Listeners, and you've all been good listeners. There we go.
Thank you very much. So we'll stop the screen sharing here. And let me see if anyone has popped any questions. We just have a hello in the chat. Does anyone have a question? Wendy, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Can unmute yourself. You're not unmuted yet, Wendy.
That's almost above my pay grade on this. But Maddie, first of all, blown away, completely blown away by your categorization of each phase of your development, and you're sticking to it no matter what. And I never knew that when I knew you in the senior house. And I want to say, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, it was riveting. Okay. But what I wonder is, I see on my iPad that it's recording. Did you guys record this, or did I record this?
Oh, that's a great question. We are recording this. What we do with these is that we edit them up and clean up some of the technical glitches, like I committed at the beginning, and then we post it on the LexArt. We have a YouTube channel.
Okay.
And so, because oftentimes there are people who can't make the live event and they like to watch it after.
Well, I so want to share it with my husband, Doug, and I took a bunch of pictures to show him because it was hard to articulate to him. Well, I told him how much you meant to us during reunion when you took all these skills together and put together fabulous videos. And, but I had no idea, literally, of the deep bench. And so thank you for all that you have shared. And I want to get a copy of this because my daughter-in-law in Port Washington, Long Island, is an artist who's temporarily on hold while she has 2 young children and my son works from home and blah, blah, blah. But she is an artist and she will love it. And I'm going to show all my pictures. So I don't want to take time from anybody else, but I can't thank you enough. It was just stunning, stunning. And I'm going to sign off now because there's another Zoom going on that I'm supposed to be there. So I'll follow up and I cannot thank you enough.
That Zoom excuse.
You know, it's the college people of my husband. And so.
No, thank you, Wendy. Thank
oh,
you
man.
so
Thank you. I'm the one thanking you. Okay, I'm going to leave now, but I can't wait to get the video.
So I think both of us are curious because we've been talking about this. Are there other folks on the call who either for themselves or as Wendy's daughter had to take time out, take a pause from the career, and are now coming back into their art and creativity, and what's that like? Curious what sort of ideas were triggered by hearing about Maddie's experience.
Maddie, it's Doug. I've known you for 62 or 3 or 4 years.
Oh, Doug.
And it's so inspiring to hear you. Can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes.
It's so inspiring because I've known you since Wickly, I don't know, 1961. I knew your brother. But both of us have had to always work and raise our families and also be artists. And it's so inspiring how you've taken yourself through all of, we grew up in the 60s in Vietnam and Attica and the farm workers and all these things. And you and I had sort of parallel paths, but you have always put your art first in all of these things. And you raised your kids, as did we. And now we're able, the kids are grown and they're out of the nest, thank God, and we can make art full time. But it's so inspiring what you've done. And, you introduced me to New England Sculptors Association. And I can't thank you enough. And I was so impressed. 50 years of art, that's incredible. I've only done 40.
I'm impressed by what I was able to save. I mean, I really don't remember saving most of that stuff, but there it is. I still have it,
Hey,
hi, it's Derek here. Maddie, I want to say hello. And by the way, I have an answer to your question about what river runs through your 50 years of life here. And my sense is that there's the great intelligence and humanity all the way through is clear to me. And I've been privileged to know you pretty well. And but also, and I think it speaks to the profundity of, given your Smith College connections and so on as well, of the impact of a liberal arts education is just manifest, and so both the intelligence and the humanity, and I really love you for that. So
well, thank you. And you know what? Looking back, I love my parents for letting me go to those places.
Yeah.
Because it really is a gift to put your children where people can enrich them either on the spot or eventually. The seeds get planted and they grow eventually.
Absolutely. Anyway, terrific. Okay. Thank you. Good to see you.
Your comments, Derek.
Okay. I'm me, Lisa. I am leaving. Maddie, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yay. Yay. And see you soon, I hope. Yay. Bye.
I wonder, are there other people who had thoughts about that question that Maddie posed at the beginning? What is it that you see themes, ideas, influences, whatever, that have run through this 50 years of productivity?
Well, I kept thinking about, let me see.
Yes,
I kept thinking about Madeleine in Two Straight Lines, who lived in a house that was covered with vines in Paris. And she has not only the Parisian background, the Catholic background, but you certainly did not live in two straight lines. And I thought the way you kept coming back, or kept, you did so many other things, and yet kept coming back to what was your instinct and your passion. It was really wonderful.
Thank you. Well, I consider Art Lexington, or LexArt, part of my family of man. That family of man lens that I have, looking around to realize we're all in a tribe. When you get into a group of arts associations or artists, it's really, you work alone. You make decisions by yourself. You choose to set time aside with no guarantees. And so an organization like the one you run gives us that lifeline to keep going. So thank you, Molly.
We're looking forward to your workshop this summer.
That's going to be good. Yeah.
Yes. So actually, we should probably want to talk about that workshop a little bit.
We can.
Sure.
Yes, please.
I love to work with every age, with a set of neodymium magnets, which is a rare earth material that really holds steel together. So a heavy, railroad spike and a piece of metal will stick together and behave. And you can make a sculpture with these full welds, these little fake welds. And I bring in buckets, and I did it for Derek, who spoke earlier up at Framingham State. I had no idea that he was at the top of a hill like Mont Saint-Michel. And I carried this 200-pound bucket of steel up a steep hill to get to the classroom. Luckily, there was an elevator in the building, but
it was about 20 minutes before the Moderna shut us down, and we went to Zoom. So thank God you got there.
Yeah, and we had a wonderful time making sculpture with magnets, and the kids were great. Creativity class or communications class that Derek designed, and I've done it with preschool and parents, and hopefully we get to do that in Lexington. I'll bring the metal and I'll bring the magnets.
Well, tell others about the story of the
Russian,
the older woman the grandmother who watched her children. Right.
Oh yes, please. That was a wonderful
we
story.
saw the photograph of the Eustis Estate, which had the Swan Lake.
Right.
Well, they had me come do a workshop because they have people come every weekend to see the sculpture and to show their property as a venue for weddings and parties. And they asked me to come do a workshop. So I spread out a massive two banquet table layer of scraps, and I had good pile up of magnets, and there were people working at it. But there was one little boy with heavy glasses who was making everything, rocket ships, robots, monsters. And he kept playing and playing. He was just dominating. And his mother spoke French and his father spoke Russian. And they had a grandmother standing between them. And as I say, she was like a tree waiting to be planted. She didn't really move. She was just looking straight ahead. And then all of a sudden, she went over to her grandson and picked up some steel and a magnet and put it together with him. Well, I thought, that's nice. She stopped napping. She's taking on. This is fun. Everyone is welcome. And the parents looked at me and looked at their grandson, and they hugged. She has Alzheimer's. She hasn't been a viable, communicative person for a long time. But watching her grandson play with the metal, she woke up and went to play.
It's a wonderful story, right?
And thank you, Molly, for reminding us to tell that story. And I think actually that's a great place. We're at 8:30, so that's actually a great place for us to end the formal part, because when Maddie first told Molly and me this story, it's such a touching human story, but also what that represented for us is that is actually what LexArt is about, and what we're trying to do with this series. it's fundamentally a belief that art is a way that we as humans can communicate with each other beyond words. Art speaks across cultures, across language, and even in this instance, bridging that divide between the world we live in and the world that someone who's trapped in an Alzheimer's universe lives in. And that's why LexArt exists, and that's why we like to bring our art to people and to share experiences, to share wonderful artists like Madeleine Lord. So thank you so much for sharing with us. With that will conclude the formal part of our show. But certainly anyone who wishes, we sort of keep the Zoom link open. So if there are any other old friends who want to say hi to Maddie, you are welcome to stay on, and we'll stay on here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you everyone who is leaving. Thank you for your time. And I hope there was some nourishment in this non-food table.
Absolutely. Thanks, Maddie.
You're welcome.
Hey, Maddie, what I find so incredible, can I talk?
Yes,
you
please
hear
do.
me okay? What's so amazing about what you do is that you're improvising all the time. I mean, I sit there when I make my sculptures, I make them with plywood, I make them with cardboard and plywood, and then I have someone else make the ultimate thing, the final project. You know, I make them small and I do this and that, and then I sub it out, which was what I did as a contractor. But what you do is you sit there and you look at all these disparate pieces, and it's really you making every single thing. And that's what I find so incredible, the improvisation, the ability to look at something and think, what is this? It's a giraffe head, it's an angel. It's amazing that you take scrap, shit, knit, you know, all this crap, and you just make it, and then you sit there and move it and move it and move it and move it. And I find that absolutely incredible, the way you improvise, the way you compose. You're like you're like Bach. You know, you take notes and you take phrases and you take I don't know, cellos and harps and violins, and you put it together in these amazing things. And you know, I've always improvised, but you improvise beyond anything I can imagine. So thank you.
Thank you. I promise you, when you come to visit, you'll look the same when you leave.
Can you make me look better?
It's just wonderful to see all your work across all those years, Maddie. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful, and they all have such character and such motion and grace to them.
Well, it's good to see you, Sue. I'm glad you could find the time. I know you're a very busy person, so thank you.
Maddie, I love you. Gotta go. I hope to see you soon. Come by, visit. Bye.
I will. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maddie,
It's my children.
the thing that I like, Maddie,
Oh, Patricia.
is, hey, how are you? So nice to see you.
Thank you.
You know, you said early on something about maybe when you were in college or whatever, you were drawn to people. And I had never seen all of the breadth of things that you had done. I mean, I've known Maddie since the 80s, but I hadn't seen a fraction of this. But what came through looking at the whole panoply of your pieces is that it's all about how much you care about people. I mean, at the personal, the small level, everybody, you know, the guy who delivers the mail, whoever else was in your sculptures, and then how politically connected and driven your pieces are, and they're public art. So it brings the politics and all the right politics and the art together and allows people to see the connections that maybe some people don't make, but that they're part of we're all part of the same group. And I know you as a caring and fun and interested person, but your art is only about the lives of other people and how they interact, how they clash, how they don't help each other, but they should help each other, and how they do help each other. So for me, seeing the themes from whenever you were 16 or 18 or something through till now, it's completely consistent that you're a citizen of the world, incredibly talented, and your contribution is to make the art that shows everybody that we all are tied to each other. And it's amazing art. I mean, that sort of goes without saying, but the themes are consistent there.
Yeah. Thank you, Patricia. I'll let you know where I've moved out in Dudley. I'm kind of surrounded by seditionists. And I figure when they come up the driveway and like my art, I'll be okay.
Well, at the very least, maybe they're scared and they won't.
No, the guitar player usually is the one that just, oh, okay, she's all right, that's fine. Anyway.
So what do the kids think?
Yeah, where's Genevieve?
I know
we're gonna... Hey, this is Genevieve. Look at you guys. This is great.
Oh my God.
That's so good to see you. It was really, really remarkable to be, sit and get to listen and see everything and know the ties and the stories, but just get to see. But
so proud of Madeleine. I mean,
yeah,
it was really incredible to just see all that. I was really moved, and I think Pat, what you were saying was the same thing that came up for me. And Maddie, whether you're making food for people or making pamphlets for organizations that you believe in, or
sculpture,
throwing a frisbee with the girls, or making your wonderful art, you really put all of yourself into everything you do, and you don't leave anything behind. No. And I think that is what allows you to take to make what you make. And the girls have a big torch helmet to fill someday.
Yeah, they do. I think
I hope you girls appreciate what kind of rockin' grandma you have.
She's not like any mother-in-law or grandmother you can ever find.
I had a grandmother who was a little bit of an artist, and she was a fun person, but this is orders of magnitude different.
Super cool. Yeah, it really lucked out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really fun. Well, thank you so much. And so impressed, LexArt, for just having this platform and gathering everybody and asking the questions. And I've actually been driving through Lexington and seeing your space, which has been fun to see so much art alive in Massachusetts.
So. Oh, come in.
I will now that we can, right? Maybe. But, all right.
We need more of those clouds.
Oh yeah, I know. My head is always in the clouds. And I remember it's early on, some news person did a video and asked me, like, I was probably 12, said, well, do you like to weld? And I said, oh no, I'd burn myself. Like, no. I was not gonna have it, but great job, Mom.
Yeah, you're fearless, Maddie, and it's fun. It's so amazing to get to see it all through the years.
Yeah,
and how much you
and never staying still. You could have just stopped at asparagus.
Oh, well said.
But much love.
We're gonna go read Madeleine.
Yeah, the other version.
There's no two straight.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
Hi, Maddie. It's Karina. I
I'm sorry, Karina. I didn't put the slide in with your woodcut of a horse that you made when you were 13 that went to the Boston Museum. My student was in the Boston Museum at the age of 12 and I wasn't. There was a call for children's art for the Beatrix Potter show, and Karina's horse went running right in the door. It was fantastic.
I vividly remember that, sitting in the fields, looking at the horses, and you made me take pictures of the horses and then figuring out how to draw lines on the photograph so I could make the horses larger on my, linoleum print. And you were just a wonderful teacher. And it was so fun to see this, because a lot of it, of course, I've seen before, but it was great to hear about your earlier life. I've never seen so many of your photographs. I just loved your photographs and, all of the work, of course. So
thank you. And it's really, if I can tell you any little secrets for tonight's wisdom of the world, it would be, don't throw your old things out. They may end up being the best thing you ever did.
Wonderful to have them all together tonight. Just wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you. And thanks, LexArt. I actually have a friend who grew up in Lexington, and I forwarded this email to her and I said, you should check out, do you know this place? Because they've got, classes and your girls might like it. And she wasn't familiar with you guys. And so now she's looking into some of the classes for her kids.
Good for you. That's
great.
Well, thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Karina. Be well. Thank you so much.
Bye.
I'm going to sign off, Maddie.
Hello, Julie.
What?
Time to put the citizen out. Oh, say Ben.
Yeah.
Tell Ben that the tennis balls were genius, and I'm looking for a can of pink ones to clean it up for the spring. Night.
Right.
Oh, lovely. This is very well done, Maddie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for finding time. Thank you so much.
Of course. This was important and wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I hope we'll see all of you at LexArt sometime.
Absolutely. We're counting on you.
Thanks, Maddie. I hope we get together soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Patricia.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.